Hello everyone, today I'll be going over how to create these pots and the reusable mold for them with nothing but poster board and cement and a couple other things that you'll need. The video is going to show you how to create the one that's on screen now. It's just a regular hexagon. The process though is the same for any shape that you'd want to make. You may kind of wonder what the holes on the inside are other than the drainage holes, and those are for guy wires so that they're easy to put in. They're totally optional. You may also notice that all of these pots are hexagonal in shape, and that's actually because they're much easier to make because of that, and I'll kind of go over that a little bit later. You can add colors to these, when you mix the cement or afterward with an acid wash or a stain. It's totally up to you though. This white one that I'm showing you is regular Portland cement. The darker one is Cementol with some charcoal coloring, and then the cream one is going to be just the plain Cementol. So the molds that I'm going to show you how to make today are reusable. As long as you take care of them, they should last quite a while, and you'll be able to get, a good number of pots out of them, as long as you're careful and, make sure that you don't miss any steps when you're making them. So here's the mold that I'll be showing you how to create today. This first part is just the outside walls, and it'll be the outside of your pot. This next piece is going to be the actual inside of it, so that'll be, that'll determine how much space on the inside there is. You can see it kind of comes apart. And the very bottom part will actually be the very top of your mold, so that'll be, the top wall. And then these three pieces all fit together. And then each time that you make a new pot, you just have to re-tape up the bottom because you'll be cutting that off to demold it. So I'm going to go over the things that you'll need to create these pots. First off, you'll need cement. You can use Portland cement and do a 50-50 mix of Portland cement and construction sand and then your water. If you do this though, you'll need to add a steel frame. I'll show you what you can use for that in a second. What I'm using now is called Cement All Rapid Set, so thank you to the person who suggested that. It's great. You don't need a steel frame on the inside, and you can make these super fast because it sets within around 30 minutes. It's also better for winter conditions because it won't shrink as much, so it's not going to break as easily. You'll need some foam core poster board, and you'll need to take off both sides of the paper backing so that it isn't going to warp. I'll show you how to do that in just a second, and you'll need more than what I'm showing there. That's just a scrap. You'll need a hot glue gun and some glue as well. You'll need a razor blade, preferably like a utility knife where you have something to hold on to. You'll need some packing tape as well. Any packing tape will really do, but really the stickier the better. A cement trowel or something you could mix the cement with and kind of flatten it out with. Again, if you're using Portland cement, get some galvanized steel wire. You could also use chicken wire if that's what you have. You'll need a sanding block. This is a 3M detail sander. Not required, but I'll go over it. This is super important for this shape of pot. This is optional, but a square or a speed square will be great for making everything be 90 degrees. If you have them, some painting knives are also really useful in just kind of flattening out those little places that you can't get to with a trowel. A 1/2-inch drill bit for drilling out your drainage holes. Some scissors. And then after that, you'll need some vegetable oil or canola oil. Any demolding agent will work great though. It really doesn't matter too much as long as it'll help it not stick. So first things first, you'll need to take both sides of the paper backing off of your poster board. So if you don't do this, the moisture from the cement will kind of seep into it and just slowly warp it. Not even slowly, it'll warp it and it'll kind of ruin your mold. I had a lot of these where I had paper backing left on them, and then I had to go back through after I created a pot and take it all off anyway. So do yourself a favor, take it all off now, soak it in water for 10 or 15 minutes, flip it around, make sure that you're getting both sides of it, and then you can just kind of rub it off, as you can see me doing here. You may need to cut out a piece of the poster board and then soak it. That way, you're actually able to fit it into whatever you're using to soak it in. You can also cut out the strips that you'll need later with the paper backing on them, soak them once they're cut out, and actually take the paper backing off then. So now I'm going to actually draw up the shape of the pot. So I'm just doing a simple hexagon for this because it's easy, and again I'll kind of get into why that is later. But just remember that the more angles that you have, the more pieces you're going to have to cut out and fit to size. So at least for the start, I would start simple and kind of work your way up from there. I realized as I made this that I didn't like the size of the pot, so you can see me kind of extending out the sides to make it larger. So draw out your shape, and then you're actually going to do the same exact shape, but you're going to come inwards about 1/2 inch. So you can see me marking each of these sides 1/2 inch, and then I'll come back in and draw my lines again. This is super important. You want to make sure that you have your outside shape, and then you come in around 1/2 inch, and then you have your inside shape. So this inside shape will actually be the width of your pot minus however thick your poster board is. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to go too thin because you also have to account for that poster board. From here, what you want to do is take that same shape that you just made and cut it out of the poster board. The poster board is much easier to cut when you don't have the paper backing on it. So something that I didn't show while making this video, you need to cut out some strips of your poster board, and you want them to be the total height of your pot. So for this, I made them around 3 inches. You'll cut those out. If you need to take the paper backing off afterward, you can do that then. But you'll also need to do the same thing and create more strips. However, you want them to be about 1 inch less in height. So I created these as 3 inches, so I've got some inner ones that are 2 inches. What I'm going to do now is measure the sides of my pot and add about 1/4 inch to each side. Then I'm going to use my square to mark those out and cut them to that length that I just determined. If you don't use the square, that's technically fine. Definitely use a ruler at the very least, but using a square is going to make it so that your pot will look a lot nicer because all of the angles will be at 90 degrees rather than kind of slanting in or out, or whatever it is. So cut them all, and then you want to make positively sure that they're all the same height. So you can see me putting them all together and sanding them all down to make sure they're the same height. They don't need to be the same length. I just did this because I was going to try and see if I could do this in a more efficient way, but they definitely need to be the same height. So it's time for me to elaborate on why the hexagon shape is easier to make than other shapes may be. So if you notice, this 3M detail sander that I got actually matches the exact angle of the hexagon. So you can see I'm putting it up to this hexagon shape, and it just continues in a straight line afterward. Again, that's because it's the exact same angle as the hexagon. So it makes it way easier when you're trying to actually get the angle right. So now that I have each of these lengths cut out, I'm going to take my speed square and just give myself a guide on the 90-degree angle. That way when I'm sanding it, I kind of know how far I can go. I'm going to actually use a ruler and the square later on just to do that for me. So you don't actually have to do this part. It's not fully necessary. Right now, just get one of the sides angled down to the correct angle on each of the pieces. That way we can worry about the actual length and the other angle once those are all set. So something that you'll want to keep an eye on and kind of take note of is that each of these pieces for the outer wall is going to overlap the next piece on one side, and it's going to actually be underlapped by the previous piece on the other side. So as you watch me do this, pay attention to how I'm putting these angles together and checking them. I'll actually slow it down here in a second to kind of show you that. So you're about to see kind of how I'm checking this. You can see that the angle is going to go onto a flat part of the next piece, and that'll fit perfectly onto your mold. The angle is going to continue and go straight with the next piece. So you can see that it fits perfectly with the shape that you originally cut out. Now you're just going to continue sanding down one side of each of the pieces. So get one side down, and then we'll worry about the other side. You could probably do more than one of these at once. In fact, actually do that later on. If you want it to be perfect, it kind of works better to do them one by one, but you can get them close doing multiples and then just kind of sand it down to where it needs to be. So something that I want you to know as you're watching this, actually make a pretty drastic mistake right here. So what I've done is got one of my angles to be where it needs to be, and then I'm marking it so that the next edge ends right at the other end of the shape. So I haven't given myself room for that next angle to overlap. So as I go through this, I'll realize that I have made them too short. So now you're about to watch me make a very annoying to fix mistake. So notice I have one of my angles sanded down. I'm matching it up to the angle of the hexagon on one side, and then I'm marking right where the next angle actually goes for the hexagon. So I'm making it even with the left side of the hexagon, and then on the right side I'm going to mark where the hexagon, where the next line of the hexagon is going to continue through that wall piece. Make sure that you do not do this. So right here, I'm marking the line of where that next hexagon side is going to continue. If you do this, your outside walls will be too short and they will not work. I actually had to go through and shave off some of the sides of the hexagon shape to make this fit because I made them too short. What you want to do is to essentially do that same thing, except put on the next piece of the wall on the right side, and then mark where that line continues with the width of the next piece added on. Again, if you do it the way that I did it in this video, as you can see where I'm marking it right where the next line of the hexagon is, it will be too short. So you should be good as long as you don't make my mistake. But one thing that can help, because I find that I've never cut these out exactly perfect, is to mark each of the angles and each of the sides with a number, and then write that same number onto each of the wall pieces. So I would have like one of the angles would be 1, the actual side of it would be 2, and then the next angle would be 3, and I would mark that onto the wall piece. That way I can make sure that each wall piece fits with the corresponding numbers that are on there, and I can make sure it fits all perfectly. So at this point, your outside walls should be done. They should fit perfectly so that, when you overlap one side and then underlap on the other side, you can get the exact shape that you just made, and it'll fit perfectly. So now what you want to do is take that original paper cutout that you made and actually cut out the inside shape that you marked that was about the 1/2 inch inside of the other shape, you're going to use this inner shape to make the guide for some other pieces that you need. So cut it out. You should be left with a ring that is about 1/2 inch, and then you'll be left with the inside cut out. Make positively sure that you save both of these pieces because you will need to use them later on, but right now you just need that inner part of it. Now that you have that inner cutout taken out, you'll want to make 2 poster board copies of that inner cutout. Not the ring part of it, but the actual inner cutout that I have in my hands right now. So make 2 of those. Now that you have those 2 inner pieces cut out, you're going to do the exact same process that we did for the outer walls, except you're going to do the inner walls now. So use the pieces of, or the lengths of poster board that you created that were smaller, that were less in height, and follow the exact same process. You're going to have one side that overlaps and one side that underlaps, and you're literally doing the exact same thing over again. It'll be the same angles. They're just going to be not quite as tall, and they're not going to quite be as long as the outer walls. So here I'm showing you a little bit further. You can see how each of the angles and each of the sides are numbered, and it matches up to a number that I've put onto each of the lengths that I've cut out and sanded. Again, this way, you don't have to worry about the shape being perfect. You can kind of make sure that the lengths are fit to the shape that you cut out. What you're gonna do now is match up each of the numbers, and you're gonna glue it all together. You want to try and have no glue kind of seeping out of it. It's okay if it seeps out into the inside of this, because remember, this is the inside of your mold. If you have any that kind of comes out onto the outside of it, just wait for it to cool down a little bit, wipe it off. You can sand it off if you need to. If you have that square, use it to make sure that you're gluing these at a right angle. So go through and just glue all of the pieces together for just the inside mold that you created. Okay, so this should be a smaller version that has that, bottom glued in of your outside mold. You haven't glued up your outside mold yet, and you don't want to quite yet. Now just go in and reinforce this, because it's going to have a decent amount of pressure when you pour the cement in, so you don't want it to be caving in or anything like that. That's actually part of the reason that you cut out the other version of that shape that's the same size, so you can fit it in the top and kind of prevent that a little bit more. But just go through, reinforce the sides and the angles and kind of where it meets the other pieces so that you're not having it cave. Also, a quick note, try not to get glue on the top, say, 1/4 of an inch of the open side of that inside mold you created, so that when you place the top in, it actually fits nicely, like you can see right here. If you put too much glue on the top bit, it'll actually prevent that from going inside of it, and it'll make it a lot harder, and you'll have to do a bunch of sanding and try and fix it that way. So just leave, again, about 1/4 of an inch from the top that you haven't glued. It's now time to glue up the outside of your mold. So once again, I'm numbering them. I'm just checking to make sure that they fit for each of the sides. I didn't do this earlier because I just wanted to get it through. So right now I'm just kind of checking to make sure that they fit perfectly and sanding them down if I need to. When you do this, as you watch this, I'm actually gluing it to the bottom portion, like the original cutout, the shape that you made. I do this so that it fits nicely, but be extremely careful how much glue you put on to glue the sides to it, because you actually need to cut it out later, because you want the sides and the bottom to be separate pieces. So I'm gluing it, but like you can see, I'm cutting it out right now, and I'm only able to do this because I've done so little glue. So just be careful when you're doing that. So there you go. Now you have the inside part of the mold and you have the outside part of the mold done. With the outside mold, you can add more hot glue to the outside parts where the pieces are connecting, and it'll help reinforce it a little bit. Now we just need to make the bottom and tape it all up. So to make the bottom part of it, we're going to take the very bottom larger hexagon and actually glue it to the hexagon that isn't glued to the inside part of the mold. To do this, take the paper cutouts that you had and put them back together. You don't have to like tape them, in fact don't tape them, and just place them onto the bottom hexagon. Make sure that all the angles and everything are matching up, and then take the outer ring off and mark the inner cutout. That'll leave you with the exact shape of the top bit there, but it'll be in the exact center, so you won't have to do any centering with that. And then just glue it together. So you want to be better about gluing this down than I was. I kind of just globbed some glue on there and then, stuck it down. You want to make sure that the edge of the smaller hexagon lines up with the markings that you made. But you also want to get the hot glue as close to that edge as you possibly can without going over. So, you don't have to use a lot of glue. Just glue it so that, you can't get cement underneath that inner part of the hexagon. If after you've glued it, you can still kind of reach underneath it and pull up that smaller hexagon, just stick some glue underneath there and push it back down so that it's stuck. So if you've been following along and making this with me, first off, thank you so much. I really hope that you get some awesome pots that are exactly what you need. But you're done with the hardest part. This is easily the worst part of this whole process. So you should have an outside hexagon for the walls, an inside hexagon for the inside of your pot, and then the bottom hexagon that kind of attaches the two together. So you should be able to attach the inner hexagon into the bottom hexagon where it's lifted up, and then that whole thing should fit into the outer hexagon. Again, it'll make more sense if you're making it, because you'll be able to see where everything is fit together, but you can also go through and sand everything and make sure everything's fitting perfectly. So now that you're finished with the poster board part of it, what you're going to want to do is tape it all up. You want the tape on there because it'll help with the demolding, and it'll help to keep your mold good for more than one use. When I first started this, a lot of these I didn't tape it up, and I ended up with like a one-time use mold. I still got some pretty cool pots from it, but it's a lot of work to create this for one pot. So all I'm doing right now is applying strips of tape perpendicular to the outside mold and just making sure that I'm getting almost all of it covered. If there's a little bit that's not covered, it'll be okay. It's not going to stick that bad. But when I do this, that does leave me with around 1/4 of an inch on the edge that I'm not covering right before the angle. So what I'm going to do is cut out strips of tape that are a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch and just apply those, so I'm not, using a whole another piece of tape that's going to make a weird mark when I actually put the cement into it. The other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing, you can see I have a little metal box right there. It's actually my wife's needle box. You can use a credit card or whatever you want to use, but make sure that you're rubbing down the tape everywhere that it's going to touch the poster board. If you don't, you can end up having that tape come off, and it just creates more work for you in the long run. So at this point, I've basically got the inside all taped up. Now I'm just going to wrap the whole outside with tape. That'll help keep the inside tape stuck on there, and it'll reinforce it a little bit more. You really don't have to follow the method that I use to tape this up. If you have a better way, absolutely do it. I find that it doesn't really work out too well if you try and tape the pieces up before you've glued it together, because the tape will demold or come off of the poster board before the glue does. So then you're just kind of left with pieces that are glued to a piece of tape that aren't stuck to the actual poster board. So I'd glue it all up first and then actually put the tape on there. We're now going to tape up the bottom portion of your mold. Remember that the bottom, and that's in air quotes, is actually the top of the actual pot. So when you fill it, the top of the mold is going to be the bottom of your pot. So same thing for this though. You can see that I actually cut the tape where the angle ends, and that's so that when I wrap it around the back side of the bottom part of the mold, it doesn't have any excess that's going to make it not fit as well. Honestly, if you find a better way of doing this, let me know. I mean, I'm not trying to spend a bunch of money, but give me a comment, if there's any better ways that you find to do this, because I find this part really tedious and annoying. This is definitely a part that you don't want to skip if you can, just because it'll really extend the lifetime of your molds. And these are a lot of hard work. It's not like this is something that you can do in 5 minutes and be done. It takes a good bit of work to do this. Be careful if you're trying to use any aerosol sprays or super glue or anything like that. It will generally melt the foam. Super glue, super good example of that. If you put it on foam, it just straight up melts it, and that's why we don't use that when we're making these. I actually do have some foam aerosol spray, but it still melts this, so you know, if you know of a product that'll work for that, that's awesome. Let me know of what it is, but otherwise tape is the best option. Now we're going to start working on taping up the inner part of the mold. I actually do 2 layers of tape on the top part of this because when you're trying to demold it, what you can do is use the drainage holes that you will be putting in, and you can stick, you know, a pen or, you know, something that'll fit into there and push the inner part of it out. It also helps because then it keeps concrete from seeping onto the inside of that tape. What you're about to see me do is try and get the tape to be on the actual edge of the poster board. After I did this, I realized there would have been a much better way of doing this, which would be to actually wrap it around the inside and then wrap it over the edge of it and then around the outside and then wrap tape around the whole outside once I've got all the angles done, similar to how we did the actual outside wall of it. This was fine, it worked temporarily, and I'll go back and change that for these other ones, but just FYI. Alright, bada bing, bada boom, your mold is completed. So, just a couple of things. In the top left corner, you can see I have a little piece that I had cut out from some extra poster board that I had. I was just using it to try and get my feet to all be the same size and shape. It really didn't work out as well as I wanted it to, and I ended up winging it anyways. But if you think of a better way to do it, which I have a couple of ideas that I'll be putting in the next video, please let me know so that I can do that and save myself some time. The next step is super important. So you're going to want to make sure that you oil up every piece of this mold that's going to be touching cement. I didn't always tape up my molds, especially because I was using Portland cement and it was fine, it worked great. But if you don't do this, you're going to end up like me and break some of your molds and have some broken dreams and a lot of lost hours. So make sure that you are oiling it up and you're not leaving any pieces of it exposed. Now that you've got your mold all oiled up, you want to tape up the bottom seams. Now remember, that's going to be the top of your pot, but you want to tape up all the seams where the outside hexagon is going to meet the bottom piece of it. That way you're not having as much cement leak out and mess things up. If you're using the Cement All Rapid set, absolutely make sure that you do all of these before you mix up your cement. The Rapid set is not a joke. It sets faster than I would have liked. I'm probably going to end up getting some of the stuff that you can use to extend how long it takes to set. But really, you're going to make it and pour it in and, you know, get it flat. And then once it's set enough, you're going to start doing your feet. And after that, it sets very quickly. Just a couple of things that I wanted to go over with you before we start with placing the cement in the actual mold. So if you're using Portland cement, again, you want to make sure that you use half Portland cement and half construction sand. And if you're using the cement all, it's just water. When you are mixing it up, place your water in first, at least some of your water. That way, when you're actually mixing it, it doesn't just clump up in the bottom, and it'll help you prevent those dry spots. Cement's kind of a weird fluid. It's kind of a non-Newtonian fluid, so while it's not moving, it is a lot more stiff. But if you can move it around, it'll actually be a lot less stiff and a lot more liquid. So keep that in mind when you're mixing it up. Awesome, so you've got your cement mixed up. Make sure that you don't have any big clumps or anything like that. And honestly, you're just going to plop it right into the center of your mold. So plop a good amount in there, build it up, and then once it's filled fairly high, you're actually just going to shake it, and it'll kind of, again, make the cement more liquid, and it'll flow down the sides. You're going to repeat that process one more time, or maybe two, depending on how much you've put in there and how big your mold is, until the sides have fully filled up. Once your sides are fully filled up, you are going to actually test the thickness of the bottom. So I just stick a little wire in there and check it. Generally, I'm looking for a little bit less than half an inch. Again, it doesn't have to be too thick. You could probably be safe with 3/8 of an inch as well. But once that's done, you're just going to shake it. Shake it over and over and over again. I believe that there are tools that you can use for this, but I don't know that I would trust it with a poster board mold. But really, I mean, maybe pretend it's a milkshake or something. You're making ice cream. I don't know. Just keep shaking it. Eventually, you probably are going to think that you've got all the bubbles out. At that point, tap the sides of the mold, a good amount to try and detach any of the bubbles that are stuck onto the tape, and shake it some more. Once you're fairly positive that you have all of the bubbles out, you're actually going to wait. If you're using Portland cement, which I am not using Portland cement, you're going to wait about an hour. And that'll give the cement long enough to kind of semi-set, and it'll be a lot easier to smooth it out and make it so that the bottom looks nice. And then you can start building your feet. So remember how I made sure that you made all of these sides the same height? Well, this is why, because now you can use the sides of the mold to actually make sure your feet are level, and so that you're not, running into the problem of having like a wobbly pot or anything like that. If you're using Cementol, that waiting time is more like 15 or 20-ish minutes. So I would just keep checking it. One thing to be aware of, the more that you play with it, the longer it's going to take to set. So you can see I'm kind of testing it and just checking it. I'm going to shake it some more to get those pieces out. And at this point, it's set enough that I'm going to start building my feet. Again, you don't have to make this little piece that I did. You can kind of just build it up and shape them as you go. But with Cementol, you're on the clock. Like, you need to do this as quickly as you possibly can, because it's going to set, and it's going to set fast. So get everything put in there as good as you can. Make them as even as you can. Make sure that they're level with the top of the mold. And once you're there, you should be good. So now we're going to place the drainage holes in. I generally like to do this after the feet just because it helps if it's a little bit more set. But I just take the 1/2-inch drill bit that I told you about earlier and just drill through it. The reason I use a drill bit, by the way, is if you just were to try and stick like this 1/2-inch wooden dowel that I'm using to kind of help smooth it out, it's going to deform the bottom because the cement has nowhere to go. But the drill bit allows you to pull that cement out. At this point, I'm also going to be adding in the guy wire holes. I'm just sticking a piece of bonsai wire through there to make sure that they're done, and that's it. So if you're using the Cementol and it's been at least 45 minutes, or Portland cement, and it's been at least 12 hours, it's time to demold. Now, all you need to do is take your razor and cut around the outside of the mold there to separate the tape. remove it as much as possible, and then realize that you forgot to put a hole in the bottom of the mold there. So you're going to want to go through, take your razor, cut a hole in the bottom. Doesn't have to be perfect, it's just so that you can grab onto it. And then just pull the bottom out. It should come out fairly easily. From there, you're going to want to just kind of wiggle the outside edges of the outer mold, just to make sure that it's not attached to the cement. And then you should be able to just push the mold through. Go slow and don't force it, but it should come out fairly easy. After that point, we need to work on the inner part of the mold. This is definitely the hardest part to remove, but it's not really that bad. So you'll notice on your mold that the cement has kind of overlapped the inner mold. And if you were to try and push it through right now, it would just hit that and it wouldn't go anywhere. So you want to take a palette knife or a butter knife or whatever you've got and just kind of remove that. It doesn't have to be perfect, you just don't want it to be overlapping too bad. And then take a Sharpie pen or whatever object you have that'll fit through your drainage holes, and just kind of slowly push through each one of them and slowly work that inner mold out. It really shouldn't be too bad, but it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. But again, if you doubled up on the tape, it should be fine. It might indent a little bit, but it's nothing crazy. At this point, what I like to do is to take one of your sanding blocks, dampen it. You don't want it wet, but damp, and you can sand down any of the rough edges or any pieces that you don't like. Just be super careful. You do not want to be breathing in this dust. It will give you cancer, at least in the state of California, apparently. So be really careful with that. I mean, like you can see I'm wearing gloves. That's just, a precaution. I don't really want cement on my hands. At this point, all you need to do is put your pot into something that contains water that it'll fit in. So I use a tote, I fill it with water, and I let it sit there for at least 3 days. The reason that I actually put it into a tote of water is two things. First off, it'll cure a lot faster than if you were to just put it in a plastic bag and spray it with water and seal the bag. The other reason, and this is probably the main reason, is cement is very alkaline. If you just were to take this out and not, put it in the water or anything, first off, your pot wouldn't be that strong because it has to cure with water. And second off, it would probably kill your plant anyways because of the alkalinity. So let it sit. I would change the water each day, just so that you can make sure that you're getting that alkalinity out. I will be putting links to all the products that I use, such as the cement and other things, in the description, just so you can see what it is that I'm using. There will also be timestamps down there, so if you are making this and you get lost, you can always check that as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you're able to make some awesome pots with this. If you come across anything that you think is cool that you've done with this, please let me know. I'd love to see it, or any ways that you found to make this easier. I make these for fun. I will be putting up an Etsy shop if you ever want to buy any of these, and they're cheap as heck once the mold is made. So, if you need a cheap pot, let me know. If not, make your own. That's the whole point of this. But thank you so much. I'll leave the obligatory like and comment or subscribe or whatever it is. But go out and make some awesome pots.